I've been working with Commerce Guys for 5 years, primarily not developing sites. In fact, I would prefer not to develop sites, but I can do it when the need arises. What I typically do is develop modules that then my teams will use to develop sites, or that Andy G will use to develop sites. But I can stretch myself and learn a few new tricks every now and then, and that's what brings us to configuration management. So I've gone from just maintaining Drupal Commerce to working on a couple of local projects in Greenville, and building them on Commerce Guys platform.sh using configuration management instead of features, because I'd kind of been burned enough by features and decided, well, may as well try something new. It can't be worse than the experience I've had before. And your mileage is going to vary there. Maybe it hasn't been an issue for you with features, but I'm sure we all have our own little war stories. If you're new to the idea of configuration management, what we're talking about in here is just the idea that you can actually manage things like views and content types and fields and permissions and user roles in your code base along with the actual code base. So along with, maybe you're still putting Drupal into the whole Git repository, but at least your custom modules and themes and things that you have that kind of make your site tick. Well, you can actually export, I'm sure we're familiar, a view or a rule or something to code and manage that right alongside of all the other code that you're writing, so that you have some benefits. The stability of the features that have been deployed and are active on your production environment. So you don't have to wonder, well, who changed that setting? I was pretty sure the default theme was this. How did it get changed to this? If you don't have that kind of thing being governed by code with a commit log showing your history of changes, you can't know who to blame, or easily revert back to what the feature is actually supposed to look like. So we're trying to manage configuration and code to improve the stability of a live site, but also to improve the reliability and speed of deploying new features to that production environment. So the idea is you might want to change a view or add a new view to a website or a panels layout or something, but you don't want to take the whole live site down for an hour while you click around in the UI and hope that you get it all right. You want to be able to develop that feature in some development environment, whether that's local, or if you're using Pantheon in your dev environment, and then roll that change live without taking the site down, and without having to remember exactly what it was that you changed to sort of manually deploy a new feature to a production website. So using some sort of configuration management workflow, whether it's using features or the configuration management module, or even just like exporting these things and managing them in code manually, like any of those options is better than just depending on the configuration in the database and manually recreating features every time you want to move them from one environment to the next. So what I'm talking about is sort of like a baseline for dependable feature development and deployment. I've kind of already said these things, but one thing that I will point out is that the features module was sort of developed with an eye toward creating reusable components. That you can create your image gallery once and then deploy that across all the different blog sites that you manage, update those in sync with one another. And so it's just this idea that a site builder could become a module developer, so we don't need the image gallery module anymore. We can just use the image module or the image field to create a gallery using some custom content type and some views and maybe some other things, and then export all of this configuration into a features module that can then be deployed across any number of sites. I don't really have that need, and on any particular site, I'm typically doing everything custom, and so for me, it's the ability to share this configuration and move it between environments was more important than the ability to create some new feature and then share that out across multiple different sites. So that's what kind of led me to use configuration management, because in configuration management, it's basically treating the entire site as one giant feature, and that's the kind of work that I do. And so if that's not the kind of work that you do, you can obviously still use features or use some sort of combination of some features developed module along with configuration management to track everything else that you're doing. But the big benefit here for us and for our current client project in Greenville was just treating the entire website as one giant feature. Using platform.sh, we all have our own development environments, and we can export our configuration to code, sync that up in our sort of sprint environment, and then eventually deploy those live to master with no downtime, with very dependable process, reliable process for deployment. And then of course we can always revert the configuration changes in master if somebody went in and changed something they weren't supposed to. So the idea is this module configuration management is a backport of Drupal 8's CMI work. Is that familiar to anybody in the audience? A few folks. I have a link at the end of this slide deck here to a session from DrupalCon Austin. You can go watch to see where Drupal is headed in this regard. But the idea is, in Drupal 8, all of your configuration, even default configuration shipped with a module, is going to be managed by YAML files, which is just a really light markup syntax. And everything from default field configurations to permissions and roles and variable settings is all managed in the code base of the site by default. And then you have the ability to move configuration between sites by exporting it and then re-importing it and so on and so forth. And that's kind of what Drupal 8 will have as a native way to manage your configuration. So you no longer have, I guess, even have to worry about contribs applying this feature set to get us all to stop maintaining features just in the database. In the meantime, we can use configuration management on Drupal 8 to sort of get our next closest step or idea with the ability to track configurations, to export them, manage them in your code base, move them between environments, and then synchronize what you have in your code base with what you have in the new environments database. And that's just like a really high-level overview. I have screenshots here to sort of walk through the process. But the big concept to get is just that every site has an active store and a data store. And your active store is your site's database where you are making configuration changes. And then if you are tracking this configuration like a variable, let's say you're tracking the site name. Like I would say, track changes to this variable. As I make those changes, configuration management will know that now the database is out of sync with the code base. That's my data store. And it will let me either synchronize those or write the change from the database to the data store. So let's actually just run through the screenshots here because it's probably a lot easier than trying to imagine it off the top of your head. So whenever you install configuration management, you would come to your not tracking page, and you would see all of the variables, all of the content types, fields, menu items, permissions, etc. That can be tracked on this website. And Josh, we haven't hit anything that isn't trackable yet, have we? I mean, maybe it was like WYSIWYG configuration or block placement, kind of some of the usual suspects for the features module as well. But the idea is anything that I want to track is going to be in here, and we just sort of adopted a strategy that said I'm just going to track everything instead of just trying to piecemeal track the 5 or 6 variables I'm trying to configure as we go. I just came in here for the first commit, we just tracked everything possible. And once we started tracking it, we were able to come over to the tracking tab where I could just select everything and then write it to my data store. So the idea here is you can check all the boxes for all the configurations that I'm tracking, click Write Active Store to Data Store, and then now I'm going to have, at least in my file system here on this website, like a representation in include files of all of the configuration on this website. So all of the variables, all of the content types and their fields, all of their different display modes and field settings and everything. That's now all in my file system. And then the next step is to get this configuration from there into the actual code base. But the idea is if something were to change, configuration management will tell me here in this track tab that this has been overridden. So in this case, I changed the user signatures value from off to on. And I can come in here and I can check that box and either write the change from my database to the file system, which is my data store, or I could revert the change by selecting to import data store to active store. So you end up basically with a copy of all of this configuration in your file system, and you can move configuration back and forth between the two. But my holy grail, of course, is to get this from the file system into the code base so I can deploy it between environments. So the next step is to, oh shoot, well, I forgot about this slide, but it's just showing that what an exported configuration looks like is just some sort of PHP data array, and they're tracking hashes to see if it's been overridden in the user interface or in the database versus what I have exported already to my data store. And you can see there that you actually have a specific include file for every single thing that you've exported. So that directory gets a bit unwieldy if you're trying to scroll through it in the IDE, but every permission, every variable, every field, every content type is accounted for in its own include file, so you can go in there and see what it looks like, I guess. But you also may have to go in here to fix things occasionally. Configuration management is still in alpha, and I think it was specifically a panel layout. Yeah, like whenever you exported a panel layout, it didn't have, for some reason, a closing parenthesis and semicolon, which of course would generate a PHP error, so we had to manually fix those things as we went. But it only bites us, once every few weeks, and it's easy enough to fix, especially because we're managing all of this in code now, so we can actually go in and see. But the idea is, once we've tracked all of our configuration, we've written it to our data store, it's now in the file system, and configuration management gives you a migrate tab where I can select all of the configurations that I want to export. And the result of that export is going to be a tarball that has kind of a manifest file in it. That's just configurations.inc, and it lists out an array all of the configurations that I've just exported. Then you have a tracked.inc file, which is the file that retains the hash for every piece of configuration I'm tracking. So that's how the system knows if something's changed in the database. It compares the hash of the configuration in the database against the hash of the configuration in the track.inc file, and it knows if it needs to write out some new change or something. And then it also has all of the individual include files for all of the configurations that I've said to export. And I think we have down here, I've also added some secret sauce to ours to actually ensure that we include the tracked.inc in the export archive. It doesn't do that by default, but I needed to do that because, again, my goal is to get this into my code base. But when I'm working from platform.sh, it isn't just easy to go in and pull out some directory from the file system, especially when you're dealing with whether it's Pantheon or Platform or Acquia, where you have your files directory managed by your platform as a service, and it's just not easy to get stuff in and out of there. I wanted to just go ahead and export everything from my configuration directory and then commit that to my code base so that whenever I push those changes up to a new environment, I could just come to the Synchronize tab and hit Synchronize Configurations, and it will read my entire config directory from my code base and overwrite anything in the database that's been updated in the code base with the new configuration. So these are just the user interfaces and tools that the module offers you to take your configuration from the database, put it into a file that's in your file system, and then export that so you can commit it to a code base and then move it between environments or sites or whatever. It isn't good for overriding default configurations, which I think can be a pain sometimes in features as well. It's not good for managing menu items. We, like I said, we started out by managing everything and then discovered that any of our menu items that we've overridden, that we're sharing a path with some menu item defined in code, the system just continues to think that we are trying to change the default menu item, and it duplicates the menu item every time we synchronize, so I have to manually delete the duplicate. So it's a bit of a pain. So we are not going to manage menu items moving forward. Also, if you're using this to manage your deployment from one environment to the next, you wouldn't want to manage environment-specific configuration. And since you're putting this into your Git repository, you don't want to use it to manage sensitive configuration like API keys. So fortunately, you can include any setting, any configuration you want to through the settings form. So right here, I have an exclude configurations text area where you can just sort of list out by name all of the things that you want excluded from the tracking list. So it's not even an option now for me on this website to go in and track the cron key, because of course each of my environments has a unique cron key, and if I start overriding that, it could mess things up. So that's like all that configuration management offers you, what it's not good for, what the process kind of looks like. Are there any questions right now from what I've shown? Yeah, Derek?
Where do you
Yeah. Yeah, the question is where in practice have we been putting the exported configurations? And I just kind of adopted a practice of putting them in site's default config. Just as a convention, I don't think it really matters. I mean, you could do it outside of the document root if your hosting environment set up to do that. In platform, I can't easily put stuff outside the doc root like that and just sort of my own directory. So I put them in site's default config, and since it's all include files, they're all PHP files, it's going to be protected against like direct access via the web because of htaccess rules. And so it's not shown here. The top setting here is the configuration directory that configurations are stored in. And I can zoom in. Right now, this is set to the private file system for a platform-hosted website. But whenever I'm syncing them from my code base, that would read site's default config. And then whenever I want to make changes, I just change it back to the writable directory to make those changes, export them, and then the upstream environment will always only be reading configuration. So I only have to change this on my downstream environment, and then I'm able to read them from I guess it doesn't really matter, but that was just a handy convention for us. So, yeah.
I noted that it was still in Sandbox. How reliable is it right now?
Yeah, the question is how reliable is configuration management, and it's there is a full module project up. It's not just a Sandbox. I think it's just called configuration.
It is.
Okay, yeah, it's just called configuration, but it's still an alpha, which is not much better than a Sandbox. We haven't actually noticed any like breaking changes in updates. The only gotcha that we ran into was that sometimes for some reason when you export a configuration it doesn't have the closing parenthesis, and it probably has something to do with like a specific ctools dependency or something. But anytime we export, we do the diff and see, okay, this one dropped a closing semicolon for some reason, and we fix it. Then you're kind of having to like adapt yourself to the shortcomings of a tool, which is not really a fun way to work. But for us, that was better than dealing with like interdependency issues in features modules. So it's kind of 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Yeah.
Is it limited to the things in the variable table, or is it like features where do you have to have like ctools export capability for a module to be?
Yeah. The question is, what specific configurations can you manage with this? Is it just variables, or is it anything that's like ctools exportables enabled or something? And the answer is it's all of the above. There's integration with ctools, so that anything that is using ctools exportables can be managed by configuration management. But then they also have their own extra rules. So like the rules module, for example, I don't believe rules uses ctools exportables. I think they manage their own, and you can manage rules via config management. Obviously views, but that's ctools. But really, it's anything on the website. So the entire website is like one giant exported feature right now.
Image styles?
Yeah, image styles, text formats, content types, permissions, roles, etc. It's all manageable. So like literally this is like the most reliable way that I know to make any number of random changes downstream and then deploy them all upstream, in one quick, merge and synchronize. Yeah.
Do you know if there's drush integration commands for this yet?
Yeah, the question is, what about drush integration? And I'm quite certain there is, but I haven't used it. Josh, have you used the drush config? Okay, I'm pretty sure there is, but like I said, I don't typically build sites. I'm mostly doing module dev, and so my drush foo is a little weak. So you can throw rotten fruit at me. That said, well, I'm learning drush because platform is built completely around drush make and drush aliases and whatnot. So I'll get there one way or the other. Lee?
One of the big problems with features was always taxonomies. It does vocabularies, but not terms. And so you'd have to end up writing all my terms in code just to make it easier. Does the CMI do terms as well?
Yeah, the question is, does this handle taxonomy terms in addition to vocabulary definitions? And the answer is no, it wouldn't handle terms. because those are still going to be content, not configuration. And same thing for Drupal 8. Like in Drupal 8, we have the distinction now of a content entity type versus a configuration entity type. And you're still going to have terms being content. But at least in Drupal 8, we'll have UUIDs and the ability to manage those a little bit handier.
How does it deal with roles and permissions? I mean, because the roles are going to be unique per, the role IDs are going to be unique per database.
Yeah, I can't remember how it's managing it, but we only define roles and manage them using this, and so like we don't have any ID collision issues.
Features has some interesting, you know, I can do these permissions for these roles, and the roles ignored, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the question is specifically around like how does it manage roles and permissions, and I know I've looked into it. I feel like it just sort of has its own little hash table inside the exporter configuration that makes sure the role ID is matching up, and then it in all of the different permission exports it says which role ID should be using these. But I don't think it's doing anything to try to like create UUIDs for roles or something like that. But again, that's why I'm only really using this to manage the synchronization of configuration between environments, not between different websites. Yeah, Josh?
There are no less than 10 drush commands that it comes with out of the box.
All right, Josh says there are no less than 10 drush commands. So I assume that might mean there are more than 10, but too many to precisely count. Yeah. Okay, so moving from just configuration management to how does it work on platform.sh, because we did have to tweak the process a little bit to make it work for us on Platform. If you aren't familiar, Platform is what we call the continuous delivery cloud. And the idea behind Platform is that we wanted a way to manage our development environments just through a user interface. If you've used Pantheon's multi-dev, where you can just spin up any number of development environments at will, that's sort of what we have by default as a default assumption is everyone wants to create their own dev workflow. Nobody needs just the dev test and production. So we kind of just let you create and branch your environments at will. And every environment is going to be an exact replica in terms of the service grid, we call it. So precise PHP configuration, MySQL, Solr, et cetera, configurations are all managed by Platform. And what it does is every time it goes to build a new environment, or every time you make a commit to your Git repository and push it up to an environment, it will rebuild the whole thing from scratch using drush make. So we end up managing projects just using a drush make file with the Git repository, then just containing that make file and the custom code that's specific to any particular website. So the idea here is, and it's going to be too small to see and probably a horrible contrast. Let me zoom in. The idea is for any particular project, we would have our master live environment, create one downstream environment where we will do sort of all of the staging for all of the features that we develop in any particular sprint, and then an additional environment for every feature that we develop. And that might manage, or that might be changing some configuration, or it might be just writing some custom code or making some tweak to a theme. Whatever it is, those are all managed in these feature branches. And then every time you push a commit up to Platform, it's going to run the whole drush make process, rebuild the environment, and then if you want it to synchronize your code and data down from the upstream environment, and sort of let you start to pursue continuous integration. The one thing it doesn't have is like baked in tools for automated testing, which would be the thing that actually makes it a continuous integration like Platform out of the box. You can rig that up if you want to, but right now the key thing to note is that after it does the drush make, it checks out your repository to the site's default directory. So in my Git repository for this project, and I should have taken a screenshot of that, but you have the drush make file, and then we have my config directory where I have exported and committed all of these configurations, and then I have a modules directory where I have our custom site-specific modules, and then the themes directory where Josh maintains the site-specific theme. So after drush make runs and it checks out this repository to the site's default directory, we now end up with site's default config and site's default modules with all of our custom modules. And of course, Drupal knows to look in there to find any of the site-specific modules and themes and whatever else. The same thing would work for libraries if you're using the libraries module. And that's where I put my config directory so that after I have done the whole platform thing and pushed commits upstream, if we look at my, my config directory here, downstream, I wrote out to the private file system so that I could then export them and commit them to code. Well, in the upstream environment, I'm still going to be using the site's default config directory as the directory my configurations are stored in. I have it checked here that this is a remote server because on platform this is not a writable directory. It's read-only, and the only writable directories are outside of the document root. So whenever I go to synchronize, it will now just read in any changes that I've pushed, from the downstream environment up to this new one, blowing away, whatever views or panel or variable configuration I had before, and then now bringing me in sync with whatever was in the code base. So the idea here is I can make any number of commits, and we've done this. I think one sprint we had like 150 commits, and that was some custom code and some theme tweaks, but it was also just a lot of configuration changes because we were building some organic groups, we were adding fields and managing this stuff with the message types, and just a lot of custom configuration. And we were able to take their site from a bootstrap wireframe to actually looking like what they expected, just with one giant push or merge upstream to the master environment, run update.php, and then run the synchronization here, and boom, everything was deployed exactly as we wanted it. And so ultimately the process that I've described, if I zoom back out, is we started the new website and platform. We created our environments. In the very downstream development environment, I've tracked a collection of configurations. I've then written them from just the active store, which is the database, to the data store, which is my file system. I've then exported them from my file system down to my local machine, where I have copied them into the Git repo, committed the changes and everything. I've then pushed them up to rebuild the environment, merged them upstream, where I'm going to then synchronize and read the configuration updates from my site's default config directory. And that's sort of the end-to-end process and what we do every time we want to go make a change. And I don't think that we've hit like any real headaches besides the menu items, which I already mentioned. So I would do this, and then I'd probably just end up managing my menus live, which is not great, but that's what we're going to end up doing. Yeah, are there any questions about like the idiosyncrasies of platform or why we had to do it this way? Drush make driven process. Do I often end up playing a game of chess while I'm waiting for it to synchronize? Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I often think of there's like two phases of a Drupal site. Well, it's a cycle in there, So you're doing the development, you get it to the client's specifications, and you turn it over to the client. Well, then the client starts doing admin stuff. That's why they want a Drupal, so they can change stuff. And they come back and say, okay, I want you to fix this bug or something like that. So you've talked a lot about how you go from the developer and push it out to the client.
Yeah.
So it's been live. How do you pull it back in to fix bugs, add features that the client has added after it's live and while it's live?
Yeah, so the question is, okay, this is all fine and dandy, but what do you do once you hand it off to the client who's going to go monkey with settings and move fields around and break things, and you need to fix it? Well, so first of all, we're pretty choosy in what permissions we give our clients. If we're managing the website, which in this case we are, they have I don't even think they have like full content administration privileges. Like we basically said, okay, like what exactly do you want to do? And we only gave them permission to do those things. But if I were going to give them more permission, the advantage here of this system is, one, I'm tracking everything for starters. So I'll be able to go to that that tracking page. Let me come back up here, and I'll be able to see everything that they've overridden. So here, where it shows me it's overridden, in the vertical tabs, it's going to to tell me here like how many need attention, which is just which configurations have been overridden by some change in the UI, and so you'll have like a great handy snapshot of everything that's changed on the website. And you could accomplish this, I suppose, with features, but like in this case, like it's pretty granular, and you're not having to create a feature for everything on the website. You just say, look, track all of my configuration. Any change, I'll come and find here. And then because I'm using Platform, what I would do if they said, hey, I broke it, come fix it, I wouldn't do it in their live environment. So I would take all of their, let's come back here to a Platform screenshot. Here we go. So in Platform, of course, and you can do this in Pantheon as well, in Acquia, you can synchronize your database and file system from upstream environments to your downstream environments. So I would create a new, fix-it branch that would be an exact replica of the master website, and that would, I guess if I'm creating a new branch, it's going to get the, the current database and file system by default. If I was using an existing one, then I would just synchronize down. What I would probably do is just go and export everything, bring it into my local file system, copy it into the config directory, and then just do a git diff and see exactly what they changed. You could just go and revert things one by one, but like I'm a terminal guy and I want to see the code, and it's easy enough for me to scan a diff and see that, okay, they changed this from off to on, they moved these fields around, and it's just a PHP array, so you'll be able to see all the different keys and everything, and if you're used to developing modules, like it'll make sense to you.
Cloning back in, does that also include the user uploaded files, and how do you deal with a client that has, we've got a client that's got close to a terabyte of uploaded files?
Yeah, I think you'd probably be pushing the limits of what any of the platforms as a service can do. But that's a question for the guys that are actually managing. I wouldn't be able to tell you how exactly I would handle that. So.
I mean, we've done some stuff with that. Basically, we just do symbolic links back to the production site that are
Yeah, I'm not sure about the other platforms as a service, but at least with ours, you'd have to have some custom, production environment set up to manage those symlinks and everything. Yeah.
So when you're messing with content types and features, one of the things that it will not do is if you were to delete a field from a content type, then export the feature, and then move it and revert it, it won't delete the field. Will config?
Yeah, so the question is, what if I delete some configuration and then want to go synchronize? Will it handle the cleanup for you? And I'm pretty sure it does, but I'm just going to put like a little asterisk there, and like you might want to fact check me on this. But the idea is, whenever you go to synchronize, let me come back to my synchronize tab. All right, so whenever you go to synchronize, if you uncheck preserve tracked configurations, it will no longer retain those fields or permissions or variables or whatever that it was once upon a time tracking. So let's see, what's an example? We had the comment module installed, and the comment module has a whole bunch of comment-related variables that it just has in the comments table. But because I tracked everything up front, these things were known by configuration management as tracked configuration. But when I disabled the comment module and uninstalled it, and those variables no longer existed, and I rebuilt my configuration directory in my code base, those variables were now gone from the tracked configuration, or the exported configuration. So whenever I merged everything upstream and did synchronized configurations, I unchecked preserve tracked, and then it just sort of got rid of those things. And I'm pretty sure it would work similarly for fields. It would just, blow them away. But you need to fact check me. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be under the same. Features doesn't like to do that because you may, when you blow away the field, you're also blowing away content.
Yeah, you're losing data. Yeah. But I kind of, and I'm not sure this is the best way to use configuration management, but like I think that's kind of the advantage of just tracking everything and treating the whole site as one giant feature. Is you know as the site maintainer, like if it's safe to ditch that data because, well, I don't want that field anymore, so I don't need that data, so farewell. Any other questions?
Does it track the Drupal 8 version of the CMI?
No, I don't think so. I think it's pretty decoupled from what CMI is doing.
Okay.
So, Well, in fact, I'm not even sure that it's actually being actively developed still. So, so you'd have to look into that. It was developed by the guys at Riot Games, just to manage their giant websites, which is pretty cool. All right, if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and tie it. Okay, one more.
If you add a module, does it flag, oh, here are the new, I mean, those will probably end up untracked, but does it at least flag it so you say, here are the new things that have shown up since the last thing, so I can...
Yeah, the question is, what if you install a module that then defines new content types or fields or variables or whatever, and yeah, they would appear in your not tracked tab. So it doesn't like give you any sort of aggressive push notification that something is not tracked, but...
Mark them as new, though.
Yeah. Let me come here. So you actually, like, it will list them all out in a separate user interface even as not tracked configurations, and you can say, yeah, go ahead and track these. But you did remind me of one other part of our process, is that we manage the installation and uninstallation of modules in our projects via another module. So it's kind of like a module controller module that just uses update functions to install new modules every time we deploy new features to upstream environments. And so if you're doing that, you obviously need to run update.php first to install the new modules before you synchronize configurations so that the features that you're synchronizing are actually there. Maybe that's part of everybody's process and I'm just late to the game, but I thought it was kind of cool. And it's kind of annoying to also have to uninstall core Drupal modules if you don't need them. But
it'd be nice to be able to say drush DL module, drush enable module, drush track module.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what the drush commands are for config management, but they might already exist. I don't know. All right, let's tie it off there. And if anybody wants to see what we're doing or see how it looks in the platform UI, I'm happy to show that off at the table. Otherwise, have a good camp. Thanks.